What happens when absolute power is given to a teenage boy with no limits, no guidance, and no fear of consequences? In 218 AD, Rome made a mistake that would haunt the empire for generations. They crowned an 18-year-old emperor who had become so twisted, so depraved, that after his brutal assassination, the Roman government tried to erase him from history entirely. His body was dragged naked through the streets of Rome, thrown into the sewers, then dumped into the Tiber River like garbage. They chiseled his name off every statue, every inscription, every public record. They wanted the world to forget he ever existed. But here's what they didn't want you to know. This wasn't just another corrupt emperor. In just 4 years, this teenage ruler would defile sacred virgins, force an entire empire to worship a black stone, and commit acts so shocking that Roman senators, men who had seen gladiators torn apart for entertainment, couldn't stomach what they witnessed. His name was Elagabalus, and today we're going to uncover the dark truth about Rome's most degenerate emperor, the boy who wanted to become a woman and nearly destroyed an empire in the process. But first, his story begins not in Rome, but in the deserts of Syria, where a cunning grandmother would orchestrate one of history's most dangerous gambles. Around the year 203 AD, in the Roman province of Syria, a boy was born who would one day rule the largest empire on earth. Although born far from Rome in the city of Emesa, which today is called Homs, this boy came from one of the most powerful and wealthy families in the empire. From a very young age, Sextus Varius Avitus Basanius was placed at the centre of an ancient and deeply mystical religious tradition. His family belonged to the local Emesene dynasty, which had long served as hereditary high priests of a sun god known as Elagabal, also called El-Gabal, meaning God of the Mountain. This god was worshipped not in the form of a statue, but as a black conical stone, possibly a meteorite which was believed to hold divine power. The stone was kept in a temple in Emesa, and elaborate ceremonies were performed in its honour. As a young boy, Basanius became the high priest of this cult, dressed in silk and gold, leading chants, offering sacrifices, and dancing in ritual processions. This position would inspire his better-known nickname, Elagabalus. The boy's status as a priest gave him status in Syria, but what made him important to the wider empire was his family's connection to the Roman throne. His mother, Julia Soaemius, and grandmother, Julia Maesa, were part of the imperial Severan dynasty. Julia Maesa was the sister of Julia Domna, the wife of the late emperor Septimius Severus. That made Elagabalus the cousin of Emperor Caracalla, one of Rome's most brutal but powerful rulers. After Caracalla's murder, Julia Maesa and her family lost their influence in Rome, but they were not finished. They stayed in Syria, where they still had wealth, power, and a plan. While most Roman boys of noble birth were educated in Latin, trained in military skills, and prepared for leadership in the army or senate, Elagabalus was raised in a very different world. His daily life revolved around the temple of Elagabal, filled with smoke, music, foreign prayers, and sacred rites. He wore bright robes, jewels, and even makeup, which were part of the priestly role, not unusual in his local culture, but very strange by Roman standards. Instead of learning Roman law or politics, he learned how to please the god, how to command the attention of crowds, and how to surround himself with mystery and splendor. In 217 AD, the Roman Empire was thrown into confusion. Emperor Caracalla was murdered while travelling in the east. The man behind his death, Macrinus, declared himself emperor, but Macrinus had a problem. He wasn't far from the royal Severan family or indeed from the senatorial class at all. He had been a praetorian prefect and took control with the support of the army, but he was never fully embraced by the senators and traditional elites who felt he had elevated himself from too low a status. When Macrinus began making peace with many of Rome's enemies and reducing soldiers' pay to shore up the empire's coffers, he lost his key pillar of status. Reverence for Severans and discontent in the military set the stage for what would follow. From Emesa in Syria, Julia Emesa was watching carefully. She was Caracalla's aunt and refused to accept her family had been pushed out of power. Instead, she made a bold play. Julia Emesa began to spread a rumor. Her grandson, Elagabalus, was not just a high priest, but the secret son of Emperor Caracalla. There was no proof, but that didn't matter. The story gave her grandson direct claim to the throne. It may have been a lie, but a powerful one. And in Roman politics, truth often mattered less than rhetoric and convenience. Julia Emesa used her wealth to buy belief and loyalty. She paid large bribes to soldiers in the 3rd Legion, which was stationed at nearby Raffinea, promising them rich rewards if they supported her grandson. In the early dawn one morning in May of 218 AD, Elagabalus was taken to the legion's camp. The commander, Publius Valerius Comazon, stepped forward and declared the boy the new emperor. He was only 14 years old. In that moment, a teenager dressed in priestly robes, who knew next to nothing of governing or politics or had even seen Rome, became the leader of the Roman Empire, at least on paper. But Macrinus was still emperor in fact, and he was not going to give up the throne without a fight. He sent a cavalry force to restore order in the rebellious legion. Instead, they defected to Elagabalus, and the commander's head was sent back to Macrinus. About a month later, the two sides met near the city of Antioch, the capital of Roman Syria. The battle was short. Macrinus's men were poorly prepared and unsure if they wanted to fight. Meanwhile, Elagabalus's army had swelled with additional defectors and included 2 full legions, the Legio III Galicia and the Legio II Parthica. Led by his tutor Gannes, the rebels attacked with energy and speed. Macrinus ran back to Antioch during the fighting, abandoning his troops in the field. Later, he would be hunted, captured, and executed while trying to make his way west to Rome disguised as a common soldier. Now, Elagabalus was truly emperor of Rome. News of Macrinus's demise and a new emperor spread quickly, but even more shocking was what came next. When Elagabalus entered Rome later that year, he did not wear a traditional Roman toga. No, instead he wore robes made of silk, covered in gold and jewels. His face was painted with makeup, and he wore elaborate wigs. This was not the image of a Roman leader, but something he brought with him was more troubling still. Elagabalus had transported a sacred object from his hometown of Emesa, the large black stone. This stone was a symbol of the sun god Elagabal, the center of his religion, and now this foreign god was coming to rule in the heart of Rome. He had had a grand temple built on the Palatine Hill, right next to the palaces of emperors past. This temple, called the Elagabalum, would become the center of religion in the capital. He made the worship of Elagabal the most important religious practice in Rome. The Roman priests and senators were horrified. This was not just about a foreign god being honored, it was about Roman traditions being broken. But Elagabalus did not care for Roman ways. He demanded that senators take part in his alien religious ceremonies. These rituals, which the emperor would lead while dressed in brightly colored robes, involved loud music, dancing, and long chants in a foreign language. During the traditional holy time of the summer solstice, a chariot drawn by 6 beautiful white horses, adorned with gold and gems, carried the divine rock around the Palatine. There was no driver. The stone was the sole passenger. To many Romans, this was deeply offensive. This ridiculous display was a mockery of the chariot-riding Roman gods, and he was forcing Rome's leaders to join in. It became clear that Rome was no longer ruled by a soldier or a statesman. Instead, there was a naive child who believed he could replace Rome's gods at the head of the empire, and Elagabalus was just getting started. When Elagabalus arrived in Rome, many hoped the young emperor would settle down and take his duties seriously. But almost immediately things began to spiral into chaos. Instead of behaving like a head of state, Elagabalus treated his position like a game, and the Roman Empire became his playground. The emperor seemed to embrace hedonism in all its forms. He threw massive banquets that shocked even the most jaded guests. Some dishes were made from camel heels, others from flamingo brains. Entire meals were dyed green or blue for no reason other than to amuse him. Guests were often more confused than delighted, but they had no choice but to pretend to enjoy it. While the empire struggled with finances, Elagabalus spent wildly. He treated the treasury, meant to fund the army, the roads, and the grain supply, as his personal piggy bank. In addition to the fortune spent on jewels, rare spices, animals, and golden furniture, he delighted in creating over-the-top spectacles. Elagabalus is said to have ordered a naumachii, or a fake naval battle akin to a gladiator fight. Not unheard of, except that he demanded it to be fought over a lake of red wine rather than water. Sometimes he would throw gold and silver into the crowds just to watch people fight over it. This reportedly even led to some people being trampled to death, but to him it was all just entertainment. One story tells of a dinner party where guests were smothered under a mountain of rose petals dropped from the ceiling. No one knows if anybody actually died, but even if they didn't, it shows how far Elagabalus would go just to shock people. Another story describes guests sitting on cushions that slowly deflated during the meal, something like an ancient Roman version of a whoopee cushion. At his dinner parties and at the games where Romans gathered to watch gladiators, he introduced a strange gift lottery. At first, people were excited. Gifts were announced on spoons or handed out randomly. Some guests won camels, chests of gold, or exotic birds, but others were shocked to receive dead dogs, piles of insects, or even bears. One person was awarded 10 pounds of lead, another was handed 10 flies. No one knew whether to laugh or be afraid. The line between fun and insult had disappeared. Elagabalus didn't care if people laughed or groaned. As long as he got a reaction, he was happy. And we've not even begun to talk about his legendary sexual exploits. He was absolutely voracious and wide-ranging in his desires. Elagabalus was said to have never slept with the same woman twice and regularly hosted opulent orgies. He was married 5 times, already scandalous given his short reign, before considering that one of his wives was a Vestal Virgin. Vestal Virgins were sacred priestesses who had taken a vow of chastity. Marrying one was considered not just inappropriate, but blasphemous. He argued that as a priest, he was a suitable match for such a priestess, only to divorce her and quickly remarry a short while later. To many Romans, this was a mockery of religion and marriage. Then came more scandals. Elagabalus didn't hide his relationships with men. In fact, he was proud of them. But the real problem was how readily he bestowed favour on any man that caught his eye, regardless of station. He is said to have preferred lovers from the ranks of charioteers, who were often slaves, and elevated men to political office solely due to the size of their phallus. He called an ex-slave chariot driver named Heracles his husband, and insisted on being called the wife or even the queen. He often dressed in women's clothes, wore makeup, and even appeared in public as Venus, the Roman god of love. Some say he begged Roman doctors to perform a surgical procedure to equip him with a vagina. Whether this story is true or a politically motivated rumour spread after his death, it shocked the Roman world. Romans believed in strong masculine leaders. Elagabalus, in their eyes, wasn't just immoral, he was turning Roman values upside down. But anyone who spoke out, even those from powerful old families, could be punished, banished, or executed. By now the tension in Rome was at its peak. The Senate, the army, and many citizens began to question whether this emperor was fit to rule at all. Elagabalus had had the power of the Roman world in his hands. He had the army, the Senate's approval, and the full support of his powerful grandmother, Julia Emesa, but that support slipped away as he fiddled and fondled. What once made him fascinating now made him dangerous. His excesses, religious experiments, and constant disrespect for Roman traditions turned even his strongest allies into silent enemies. The Praetorian Guard were the first to grow restless. These hardened soldiers had seen cruelty, extravagance, and even madness, but what they now witnessed crossed a line. They had once fought to put Elagabalus on the throne, but he was nothing like they had expected. He was no warrior, and often not even a man. Nothing like the Emperor Severus, who had supposedly sired him. The Senate was just as unhappy. Senators were used to emperors having mistresses, spending excessively, or favouring certain gods. But Elagabalus wasn't just bending the rules, he was tearing them up. Instead of treating them as wise advisors, he ignored them, insulted them, and made them watch while he danced dressed as a goddess. Many felt humiliated. They didn't dare speak out openly, but behind closed doors they began to look for a replacement. And Julia Emesa, political animal that she was, noticed the shift in mood. She had once worked so hard to make Elagabalus emperor, but now she saw the writing on the wall. If something didn't change soon, the empire might not just turn against the emperor, but on her entire family. So she made a calculated decision to limit the damage. She turned to her other grandson, a calm, polite teenager named Alexander Severus. Alexander was everything Elagabalus was not. He was quiet, obedient, and respectful of Roman traditions. Now Julia Maesa began to bring him forward. She introduced him to the army. She spoke about his good character, but the true masterstroke was convincing the emperor to give his younger cousin the title of Caesar in 221 AD, making him second in control and heir to the throne. This made it possible to replace Elagabalus without losing control. Elagabalus only gradually caught on that his position had become tenuous. When he realized that his own Praetorian Guard came to prefer Alexander, he reacted with fury and panic. He tried repeatedly to remove Alexander from the line of succession, but the Senate refused to formally strip the title. So he plotted to have Alexander killed. Some say he tried to poison him, others that he sent assassins, but each plan failed. Elagabalus's behavior became more unstable. He no longer trusted the people around him. Friends disappeared. Officials were dismissed without warning. Even his closest advisors started keeping their distance. One by one, his supporters began to drift away, either out of fear or frustration. The emperor, who had once surrounded himself with admirers, was left isolated and paranoid. Something big was building. Everyone could feel it coming. But for once, Elagabalus found himself utterly powerless to stop it. Just 4 years after becoming emperor, the boy priest who has once dazzled the army with gold and promises now stood before soldiers who would no longer even look him in the eye. His Praetorian Guard refused to salute him and stayed silent when he walked by. But when his cousin Alexander appeared, the same soldiers clapped and cheered. The people, the Senate, and even his own guards had made their choice. They wanted Alexander. Elagabalus began preparing for the worst. He had scarlet and purple robes made in case he had to hang himself. He ordered golden swords to be placed around the palace, thinking he might die with honor. He even collected poisons and kept them inside precious gems, planning to swallow one if the situation demanded. One historian wrote that he even built a tower to jump off, and decorated it with jewels and gold because if he was going to die, he wanted it to be remembered as the most luxurious death in history. But none of these exquisite plans would work out. On March 13, 222 AD, the situation finally came to a head. In a bizarre test of loyalty, Elagabalus had spread a rumor that Alexander was dead. The Praetorian Guard demanded that both Elagabalus and Alexander come to their camp. By this time, Elagabalus had no real choice but to go. He arrived with his mother, Julia Soaemius, who hoped to calm the soldiers and keep order. But when they entered the camp, only Alexander was greeted with cheers. Elagabalus was met with silence and cold stares. He lost his temper and ordered all the soldiers who had ignored him to be executed. That was the final mistake. The guards turned on him immediately. Elagabalus tried to hide. He ran from the camp and is said to have crawled into a latrine, hoping no one would find him there. But it was too late. The soldiers stormed in, dragged him out, and murdered him on the spot. His mother was also killed with him. Their bodies were stripped, tied up, and dragged through the streets of Rome while people watched. In the end, his corpse was thrown into the river Tiber. But Rome wasn't done. After his death, the Senate declared a damnatio maiore, just as it had done to Macrinius only a few years earlier. Elagabalus's name was erased from official records. Statues of him were destroyed or had their likeness carved into someone else's, typically the new emperor, 14-year-old Severus Alexander. Coins were melted down. Public inscriptions that mentioned him were scratched off. Rome tried to pretend he had never existed at all. Even after his death, Elagabalus did not fade quietly into history. Instead, he became a symbol of everything the Roman elite feared. His name was connected to disorder, disrespect, and destruction of tradition. To Rome, he represented the danger of letting foreign customs, uncontrolled luxury, and personal pleasure overpower Roman discipline and values. For centuries, Elagabalus remained one of the most hated names in Roman history. Roman writers quickly shaped how he would be remembered. Historians like Cassius Dio and Herodian described him as a man who had brought shame to the throne. Later writers added even more shocking stories, likely exaggerated or invented, to make his example even clearer. This is what happens when an emperor forgets what Rome stands for. His strange religious practices, his behavior in public, and his obsession with his own desires were not just odd, they were treated as threats to the empire itself. He had power, youth, and wealth, but never sought to understand the empire he ruled. But what do you think? Was he truly the worst emperor in Roman history? Or could he have been exaggerated by those who came after him? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoy history's most shocking stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. See you in the next one.